A preamble is a brief introduction that explains why they wrote a document. The preamble was written because the founders wanted a government that would provide stability and order, protect citizens' liberties, and serve the people. The major goals of the preamble are establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. The government does these things by having a national court system. It ensures domestic tranquility by having a local police force, provides for the common defense by having a national military, promotes the general welfare by having Social Security to give people after retirement, and secure the blessings of liberty by distributing the power among the three branches.
Articles 1, 2, and 3 create the three branches of government. Article 1 establishes the legislative branch. In Section 1 of Article 1, this section creates the United States Congress. It states that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states. In Article 1, Section 8, there was a special case involved, called McCulloch v. Maryland, where the court supported the idea that a elastic clause gave Congress the right to make any law necessary to carry out powers. Article 2. Article 2 creates an executive branch to carry out laws to Congress. In Article 3, Section 1, it establishes a Supreme Court to head the judicial branch. Section 2 outlines the jurisdiction of Supreme Court and other federal courts to rule on cases. This article also defines treason.
Article 4 requires each state to give citizens in other states the same rights as its own. Congress shall have the power to dispose of and make of all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the U.S. Article 5 talks about the ways that the Constitution can be amended or changed. Process for amending the Constitution. Amendment proposed by 2/3 of vote of both House of Congress or a constitutional convention called by Congress or petition of 2/3 of the 50 states. Then it's ratified by 3/4 of the 50 state legislatures or 3/4 of special constitutional conventions called by the 50 states. Article 6 contains the Supremacy Clause, establishing the constitutions, laws passed by the Congress, and treaties of the U.S. It requires federal and state officials to take an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. Article 7 addresses ratification and states that the Constitution would take effect after it was ratified by 9 states. Delaware was the first state to ratify, followed by Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, and New Hampshire.
The first 10 amendments are part of the Bill of Rights. Amendments are changes or additions to the original Constitution. The First Amendment protects the basic rights and freedoms of the American people. It protects the freedom of religion, speech, the press, and the right to assembly and petition the government. In the Supreme Court case, Muir v. Minnesota dealt with the First Amendment. In the case, a news editor called local officials gangsters and grafters. The court ruled to prohibit the publication of malicious, scandalous, and defamatory newspapers and magazines. The Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms. This means that people have the right to have guns, but the government can place regulations on them. This amendment was instilled to prevent the national government from repeating what the British had done. The British tried to take weapons away from the colonial militia. There is some controversy over the meaning of this amendment. Some think it protects the individual right to possess firearms, while others think it was simply meant to preserve the right of states to have militias. The Third Amendment states that the government cannot house soldiers in private homes. This reflects the grievances about the British housing troops in the colonial home. This amendment protects the right to privacy. The Fourth Amendment states that there shall be no unreasonable searches or seizures without proper warrant. This also protects the right to privacy. The New Jersey versus TLO was a Supreme Court case in which a school official searched a student suspected of possessing cigarettes on school property. Marijuana was recovered during the search. In the court case, it was ruled that school officials did not need proper warrants to search students or their property. Only probable cause was needed.
The Fifth Amendment is no person shall be held to answer for a capital unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. One example of this is Miranda versus Arizona. Miranda was accused for kidnapping and raping a girl, so he was questioned intensely for 2 hours without knowing about rights to refuse answering questions, so he confessed due to the high-pressure tactics. The Sixth Amendment is the accused have the right to a speedy/public trial. One example of this is Smith versus Huey. The defendant was in federal prison when he was charged with a Texas crime. 7 years later, he was still in prison, and the state still didn't prosecute his case.
The Seventh Amendment says that in common lawsuits that are greater than $20, the right to a trial by jury will be preserved. And the Eighth Amendment states that excessive bail cannot be set, and neither will fines or cruel and unusual punishment. And it says that bail can't be set so high that you cannot pay it. And an example of that would be Rober versus Simmons, where a 17-year-old boy was sent to death when he was 17, and the court ruled that executing minors is cruel and unusual punishment.
The Ninth Amendment. The people have more rights than are formally stated in the Constitution. It protected their rights not specifically guaranteed in the Constitution. In Olmstead versus United States, the court ruled that wiretaps on a telephone were legal because it didn't require the police to enter private property. But in 1967, in Katz versus the United States, the Olmstead decision was overturned. They ruled that wiretap was a search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment. If we didn't have the Ninth Amendment, there would be a lot more restrictions. The 10th Amendment. Any responsibilities not given to the federal government are given to the states and people. In 1793, 2 citizens of South Carolina had sued Georgia in the Supreme Court over property confiscated during the Revolution. Georgia and the legislature maintained that a sovereign state could not be summoned into federal courts in order to defend itself. Georgia officials refused to appear for the trial. The Supreme Court decided against the state. Although Georgia lost the court case, it won its power struggle. The world would be different for the fact that the federal government would have too much power and it would be easy for them to become a communism. The 11th Amendment. An individual cannot sue a state in a federal court. No state may be sued in a federal court by someone from a different state or foreign country. This amendment was added to the Constitution to prohibit a state from being sued in federal court by citizens of another state or another nation. The 11th Amendment came about as a direct result of a Supreme Court decision in Chisholm versus Georgia. Amendment was approved by Congress on March 4, 1794. It was ratified February 7, 1795. The 12th Amendment. This amendment states that there are separate ballots for president and vice president. It was added in 1804, correcting a problem that arose in the method of electing the president and vice president. This amendment provides for the Electoral College to use separate ballots in voting for the president and vice president.
Amendment 13, made in 1865, abolished slavery in the United States. It also did not allow people to perform services for other people due to a debt. You would go to prison for committing this crime. This was the first amendment to be divided into sections, and also the first to give Congress power to enforce the law. Getting rid of slaves and dealing with segregation and discrimination are controversy with this amendment. The world without this amendment would have slavery, and we would not have equal rights. Amendment 14, made in 1868, intended to do four things. One section defines citizenship. Citizenship is all people born in the U.S., including all former slaves. This amendment was made to penalize southern states for not giving all citizens the right to vote. A court case dealing with this was Brown versus the Board of Education, where segregation in schools was ruled unconstitutional because it denied equal protection. Section 2 kept Confederate leaders from being in state and federal offices. Section 3 assured that public debt will be repaid. Section 4 said that Congress could pass civil rights bills and enforce them. The 15th Amendment, the right to vote, was established in 1870. Section 1 of this amendment replaced the second section of Amendment 14. This amendment guarantees all American citizens the right to vote. States cannot determine their own voting qualifications. African Americans, Asians, and Hispanics were often denied this right due to poll taxes, literacy tests, and white primaries when this was first created. However, Section 2 of this amendment gave Congress power to enforce it. Stronger laws were passed in the 1950s and 60s to end racial discrimination. Without the 15th Amendment, many people would be denied the right to vote. Income tax is the 16th Amendment. Created in 1913, this amendment originated when the Supreme Court declared a federal income tax unconstitutional in 1895. The amendment authorized an income tax that levied on a direct basis. The 17th Amendment is the election of senators, created in 1913. Section 1 states that it is the right of the people to elect senators. This amendment was created in order to make the choice of senators more democratic and less corrupt, and to improve state government. According to Section 2, states must have an election to fill a vacancy. The governor may be a substitute senator until an election is held. Without this amendment, the Senate would be corrupt and undemocratic.
The 18th Amendment banned the manufacture and sale and transportation of alcohol. It was ratified on January 16, 1919, beginning of prohibition. This amendment is the only amendment to be repealed. If this amendment was still ineffective, the nation would lose a popular part of society. This is how mobs and mafias began to develop.
The 19th Amendment gave the right to vote. The right to vote won't be denied by the United States or any state on account of sex. It gave women the right to vote. It was passed because women activists protesting for voting rights. In 1872, a suffragist brought a series of court challenges designed to test whether voting was a privilege of the U.S. citizenship. Women would have no influence in how our government or nation is run today without this amendment.
The 20th Amendment established the beginning and ending of the terms of the elected federal officers. This amendment means there are set dates when congressmen, senators, and other officials take and leave positions. Without this amendment, government officials could remain in the government for an unlimited amount of time. It solved the lame duck problem, and because with longer term senators and representatives were inactive, this made them work more.
The 21st Amendment repealed the unsuccessful 18th Amendment. It continued the ban on transport of alcohol in which possessions violated state laws. This means that from now on, alcohol consumption, purchase, and possession is allowed, and without this amendment, our economy would be affected because alcohol purchase is a big part of society.
The 22nd Amendment limits the presidents to a maximum of 2 terms. It was passed due to Franklin Roosevelt serving 4 consecutive terms. Also, the fear of too much executive power helped this amendment go through. A vice president is not limited by those 2 terms and can serve his or her presidency for 2 terms. Unlimited and president can serve up to 10 years.
23rd Amendment. The 23rd Amendment stated that in 1961, it gave the people of Washington, D.C. the right to vote. The 24th Amendment. Before the 24th Amendment, people always had the right to vote, but there were poll taxes. This prevented low-income African Americans from voting. 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment stated that if the president is unable to perform his duties, the vice president will take over. If the vice president and the president can't agree on who takes over, then Congress comes in to decide. The 26th Amendment. Before the 26th Amendment, the voting age was 21. After... Shoot. It was 18. The 27th Amendment. 27th Amendment states that any federal pay raises will not be effective until the next term.